Hello, and welcome to Dusklore, where some of the darkest stories get a voice. If you have a personal story you'd like to share, check the description for submission details. And if you enjoy what we do here, consider supporting us on Patreon. Subscribers get early access to every video, and some exclusive content too. Links in the description. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin today's creepy cabin stories. I never really knew my grandfather all that well. He was the kind of man who lived deliberately apart from the world, tucked away in a remote corner of northern Michigan where the trees swallowed the sky and silence had weight. When he passed, I was shocked to learn he'd left me something. A cabin, deep in the woods, on land so far from town it didn't even show up properly on GPS. There were no roads to it, just a half-rotted trailhead off an old logging route, barely wide enough to walk. I wasn't close with him, but something about the idea of the place tugged at me, like it had been waiting. So, I decided to spend some quality me time at the cabin. I figured it would be a nice break from everything. I packed a few days of supplies, grabbed my grandpa's old map, and hit the road. I just wish I knew then what I had really signed up for. The drive was only a few hours, but as I got closer to where the map pointed me, it seemed like a different world. Thick forests, no cars, and paved roads became a distant memory. By the time I reached the trailhead, my phone had lost signal completely. The trees pressed in like curious onlookers, and the path ahead was choked with roots and wet leaves that squelched under my boots. It took nearly an hour of hiking before I saw it. The cabin. It looked exactly like you'd expect. Weathered wood, moss climbing up the sides, and a rusted tin roof that creaked every time the wind passed. The front door was already unlocked. Or maybe it never locked at all. Cautiously, I opened the door as it creaked on its worn and rusty hinges. To my surprise, the inside of the cabin looked cozy and well kept. It was one bedroom, a living area, and a small kitchen space with a wood-burning stove. Everything was nicely furnished, and I even got the luxury of electricity, but only for the lighting. Apparently, the old man got sick of the dark at some point and had solar panels installed. I wandered the place slowly, trailing my fingers along the wooden walls, half expecting the whole thing to fall in with a sneeze. There were photos of him on the walls, grainy, color-faded shots of him standing outside the cabin, always alone and always frowning. One photo in particular caught my eye. My grandfather at the edge of the forest, standing beside something tall. It was almost too blurry to tell, but whatever it was, didn't look quite human. I set it down, telling myself it was just a tree. Maybe a trick of the light. But even then, I felt something watching me from the tree line. I decided to ignore it for now, knowing that I'd have to go get wood for the stove before dark. So, I grabbed a book from my grandfather's collection and settled in to get lost in a tale from some far-off land. But that's when the noises started. I think it was about 20 minutes after I started reading when I first heard it. Some kind of slightly muffled scraping or grinding noise coming from just outside the only window in the living area. That window overlooked the front yard and had a clear line of sight all the way out to the tree line. But I couldn't see anything through it that could even be making those noises. I stood up, slowly, setting the book down with a quiet thump, and walked over to the window. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned in, squinting into the dim light. Nothing moved. Not the trees, not the grass, not even the air. But the sound kept going. It wasn't metal or animal. It was slower, like something dragging its fingertips across old wood. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, heart thumping loud enough I swore the trees could hear it. The clearing was empty, but the scrape marks were fresh. Long, narrow grooves, etched into the wood under the window, leading towards the trees, and then stopping near the edge of the cabin wall. Scared that it might see me, or worse, that I might see it, I turned to run back inside. When I did, I got a better look at the door. It was covered in thin scratch marks, but the door itself looked much newer than the rest of the cabin. The hinges were still old and rusty, but the door seemed to have been replaced somewhat recently. At that moment, I felt as if my grandpa may have left out some key details about this creepy old cabin. I went back inside, locked the door, and started searching for something, anything he could have left to explain what was happening. In the bedroom, tucked underneath a floorboard that groaned louder than the rest, I found a small tin lockbox. No key, of course, just my luck. So, I pried it open with a fire poker I found near the stove. Inside were yellowed pages, brittle with age, filled with scribbled notes in my grandfather's handwriting. "It watches from the trees," one line read. "Never comes near when the lights are on. Never look it in the eyes." Another page simply said, "The door must be kept well. It always tries the door. Then, do not open it after midnight." My stomach dropped as I checked the time. 11:52 p.m. Frantic, I rushed around the cabin, locking doors and windows and turning on every light. What kind of monster was he dealing with alone all this time? I wondered. I stopped to catch my breath after securing everything just as the clock struck midnight, and I heard a sound I will never forget. It came from the tree line, from where I felt like I was being watched before. It sounded almost human, but not quite. It was trying to be human, but the words sounded garbled. "Jesse," it bellowed. "Help!" The voice sounded almost like my grandfather, but it couldn't have been. He'd been dead for 2 months. I saw him in the casket, cold as ice. One word came to mind. Skinwalker. Believe what you want, but I know what I heard that night. And I know what I saw. The porch light flickered once. Then it went out. I backed away from the door, heart pounding, as footsteps, slow, deliberate, pressed into the gravel outside. I peeked through the window, just enough to see a shape standing at the edge of the porch. It was tall. Its features were all wrong. Its arms were too long and its posture was all off, like a man wearing his own skeleton the wrong way. The thing had my grandfather's face, but the skin hung loose, like it had been pulled over something else. And its eyes, they weren't his. They were pits. Black, empty pits that looked straight through the glass, and straight into me. Fear gripped me as I backed away quickly, tripping over my own feet. I ran to the bedroom, slammed the door, and ducked inside the closet. The closet door had a lock on the inside. The door itself seemed thicker and sturdier than a closet door should be. Maybe I wasn't the first person to hide in there. But I stayed there the whole night, while that thing scratched and clawed at the windows and doors, calling me, calling my name. Then it stopped. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew it was 8 a.m. and I could see hints of sunlight peeking under the closet door. I didn't waste another minute. The urge to leave that cabin was intense, so I rushed out of the closet to pack my things. I half expected the cabin to be wrecked, windows shattered, doors torn from the frame, but it wasn't. Everything was untouched, except for one thing: a single line of words carved into the inside of the front door. Next time, I'll wear you better. I slammed it shut behind me and I sprinted down the trail, heart racing, breath sharp in my chest. I didn't stop running until I hit asphalt and cell signal. I've never gone back. I don't care that the cabin is mine now. Let the forest have it. Let it have it. I was 13 the first time I saw the cabin. We lived on a ranch in central Wyoming with miles of open land backing up to a thick tangle of forest the locals called Dead Man's Cut. Most of the trees were pine, tall and tight-packed, and I used to play out there every weekend, even though my parents told me not to. They didn't care much about what I got into. I'd build forts, climb trees, set traps for imaginary monsters. But they always warned me about the cabin. "Don't go near it," my dad said the first time I came home from the woods with pine needles in my hair and sap on my hands. "Nothing grows there. Animals stay away. You should too." So, of course, I went looking for it. I was young and danger didn't mean much. Besides, it couldn't be that bad, right? The morning I decided to sneak out and explore the cabin was blustery and gray, but it almost felt as if I was meant to go to it. Figured I wouldn't be gone too long, so I grabbed a flashlight, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water before creeping out of the house and making my way towards the forest. I stopped just before the woodline, taking in the eerie early morning atmosphere that suddenly felt slightly unfamiliar, and thought for a moment if I should really be doing this. But that tiny bit of doubt soon gave way to intrigue as the trees seemed to pull me toward them, and I stepped into the forest. The deeper I walked, the quieter it got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet either, the kind that made your ears ring because nothing was making a sound. No birds, no wind. Even the crunch of twigs under my feet felt muffled, like I was stepping through a vacuum. Then I saw it, half hidden behind a curtain of dead branches, sun-bleached gray and leaning just slightly too far to the left. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for decades, maybe longer. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges and the windows were nothing but gaping holes with tattered shreds of curtain fluttering faintly inside. The ground surrounding it was bare. No grass, no weeds, not even moss, just cracked, dry earth like something had burned the life out of it. And that was when I noticed. The trees stopped growing in a perfect circle around the cabin. That should have been my first red flag, but all I could think about was quenching my thirst for mystery. Peering through the gaping doorway felt like staring into the abyss. Cold, black nothingness. As I brushed past the rickety door, it fell off its hinges and crashed into the hard dirt with what should have been a loud bang. But that's not what happened. It did make a sound, but it was more of a muffled crunch, as if the sound itself was cautious of making its presence known to the looming cabin. Slightly on edge, I cautiously stepped inside. The air inside was colder than it had any right to be, sharp and wet like the inside of a root cellar. Dust hung in the air in thick strands that didn't move, even when I walked through them, like they were suspended in something thicker than air. The floorboards creaked under my sneakers, and every step made the whole place feel like it was breathing. Just barely, but enough to make the hair on my arms raise. Furniture was still there, but warped and rotting, like it had been left in a flood and then forgotten. A single chair sat in the corner of the room, facing the empty fireplace. And, though I knew it hadn't moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just stood up seconds before I entered. Then, somewhere below my feet, I heard a soft scraping sound. Faint, rhythmic, like someone dragging their fingers across stone. I cautiously searched the cabin for a set of stairs or a door of some kind to take me down below where the sound had come from. But aside from the structure being derelict and abandoned, it seemed to just be an ordinary single-level cabin. After a few minutes of searching, I tripped over an old rug I hadn't seen under the layers of dust and decay. Beneath it lay a trapdoor that didn't seem to fit with the rest of the cabin. The wood was slightly cracked, but still wholly intact. More importantly, though, it had a series of symbols etched into it. Near the handle lay a large padlock that was so heavy I could barely lift it. But the key to it was, strangely, nestled in a crack in the floorboards, right next to the trapdoor. That should have been my second red flag. But something about the key felt intentional, like someone, or something, wanted me to open that lock. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into place, and, with a reluctant clunk, the padlock popped open, dropped onto the floor with a muted thud that barely echoed. The trapdoor creaked as I pulled it open, revealing a staircase swallowed in darkness, each step narrower and more crooked than the last. A wave of musty air poured out, thick with the coppery tang of rust, or something worse. My flashlight was about to make itself useful. I took one hesitant step down, then another, flashlight beam trembling in my grip as it swept across the stone walls below. The sound I'd heard earlier, the scraping, had stopped, replaced now by a low, almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As my feet landed on the hard, dry dirt at the basement floor, the whispers grew slightly louder, while the sound of my footsteps all but vanished. My flashlight glinted off of something thick and slimy that seemed to cover every inch of the stone walls. I thought the basement was empty. There wasn't any furniture, doors, or really anything besides air that was so thick I could almost see it, until I looked down at the floor in the center of the room. A huge, ornately drawn pentagram surrounded by unlit and half-used candles decorated the floor. This was the third red flag. My final warning. I should have left that cabin right then and there. But I didn't. I stepped closer instead, drawn to the circle like it had a gravity of its own. The dirt inside the pentagram was darker, richer, wet maybe, and the symbols etched into it were too precise to be old. Someone had made this recently. I crouched down, holding my breath, and noticed the faintest heat radiating from the center of the circle, like the ground itself was exhaling. Then, the candle flames burst to life. All at once, every single wick lit with a hiss, casting long, warped shadows across the walls that twitched when they shouldn't have. The whispers became clearer, guttural, layered, speaking in tongues I couldn't recognize. And then, from the corners of the room, something moved. A shuffling sound came from behind me. Panicked, I turned to look while instinctively stepping away from it and toward the center of the pentagram. As soon as I did, the whispers became cackles, and shadows of unseen things danced rapidly across the oozing stone walls. Suddenly, the flame of every candle grew blindingly bright, and the lines of the pentagram began shimmering with a foreboding red glow. The shadows on the walls began to morph and shape themselves into things, beings that looked to be made of darkness itself. They had no eyes, no mouths, just vague humanoid outlines, wrapped in writhing tendrils of black that licked up the walls like fire. My flashlight flickered violently in my hand before dying completely, leaving me lit only by the pulsing crimson of the circle and the wicked candlelight. The shadows twisted and clawed at the edges of the room, but wouldn't cross the pentagram's border, as if something was holding them back. But I didn't feel safe inside it either. The ground beneath my feet was trembling now, rising and falling like a heartbeat. A high-pitched ringing overtook the whispers, and for one horrifying moment, I thought I saw a face forming in the center of the circle. Huge, featureless, pale as bone, pushing against the dirt from underneath. And then the basement screamed. Not a sound I heard with my ears, but something that tore through my mind, loud enough to make me drop to my knees, clutch my skull. Pain erupted from my chest like skin was set ablaze by the fires of the sun itself. I screamed in agony. The basement roared as the earth beneath me twisted. It felt like hours, but maybe it was just seconds. When it was done with me, the air was sucked out of the room as if drained by some otherworldly force. I struggled to breathe and passed out, clawing at my own throat. When I came to, I was outside, face down in the dirt just beyond the circle of lifeless ground surrounding the cabin. The sky above was blue again, birdsong faint in the distance, and for a moment, I thought I'd dreamt it all, until I moved. My entire body ached like I'd been trampled, but it was the pain in my chest that made me sit up gasping. I yanked at my shirt and there it was, burned into the flesh above my heart, a blackened, jagged sigil made of the same symbols I'd seen carved into the trapdoor. The lines pulsed faintly under my skin, like it was still alive. I never spoke of the cabin to anyone. My parents noticed the scar, but I lied. I said I fell in the woods. They didn't press. But the nightmares never stopped. It's been 20 years since the day I went into that cabin. I've never told another living soul when I experienced that day. How could I? I'm still not sure if it was real or not. But this scar and these nightmares, they tell me that it's as real today as it was 20 years ago. We hadn't been back to the lake in over a decade, but it felt like time hadn't touched the place. The pine needles still crunched beneath our boots the same way they had when we were kids. And the air still smelled of damp moss and old stories. There were 4 of us, me, Aaron, Jules, and Danny, armed with a cooler full of beer and way too many snacks, and the kind of easy nostalgia that makes you forget why you ever stopped coming. The trail was just how we remembered it, winding through the trees like a half-forgotten secret. But when we rounded the final bend toward what used to be our clearing, we stopped cold. Nestled perfectly between 2 impossibly close spruce trees stood a log cabin. It looked almost too pristine. No dust, no moss, no signs of age, just fresh wood, dark iron hinges, and smoke curling softly from the chimney. We stared at it in silence for a moment, each of us searching our memories. The cabin hadn't been there before. It was like it just appeared out of nowhere. Slowly, cautiously, we approached the front door. It was open just a crack, and the smell of fresh apple pie wandered along the warm breeze, creeping out and drawing us in. Our hesitation was short-lived, and we stumbled over each other trying to get through the door without so much as a polite knock. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, fully furnished, as if someone had just been there. But no one was there. We dropped our bags, served up fresh slices of hot apple pie, and melted into the all-too-comfy couch in the living room. That's when I saw it. On the shelf above the stone fireplace was my old stuffed tiger, Max. The same one I lost during our last trip here, 11 years ago. He was exactly the same as I remembered him. Same ragged ear, same faded orange fur, same small patch on his belly where Mom had sewn him back together after a dog tore him open. I hadn't thought about Max in years, but seeing him there filled me with something warm and sad and fragile all at once. I didn't even question it. I just reached up, took him down, and held him against my chest like I used to when I was a small child afraid of the dark. I should have felt disturbed. I should have asked how the heck he got there. But all I could think about was how good it felt to have him back. Aaron looked up from his plate as if he were about to question me, but then a smile crept across his lips as his eyes widened. When we were kids, Aaron thought he'd grow up to be in a rock band and had a special guitar his dad gave him as a birthday present. But he'd thrown it out years beforehand after it was smashed to pieces in an accident at the same campsite. And yet, there it was, leaning up against the fireplace. It was still cracked and chipped in places, but it looked like someone had taken great care in meticulously restoring it. I started feeling a bit uneasy at that point, but who was I to ruin this for everyone? Nobody else questioned it. Nobody else said a word, so neither did I. Jules wandered off shortly after, drawn like a moth down the hallway toward the back of the cabin. I watched her disappear into one of the rooms, and after a few moments, I heard the unmistakable jingle of those wind-up music boxes she used to collect. The melody drifted through the air, distorted, warbling, like it was playing underwater. Jules didn't come back out right away. Danny followed not long after, captivated by a framed photograph on the wall. An old snapshot of her childhood dog, Loki, who died before we were even in high school. In the photo, Danny couldn't have been more than 7, grinning wide while Loki licked her cheek. I remember that photo. I remembered when she lost it in a house fire. She touched the glass like it might vanish if she blinked. None of it made sense. And somehow, all of it felt right. While we didn't talk about the strangeness of these sentimental items appearing seemingly out of nowhere, Danny did mention the size of the cabin when she came back. The cabin was much larger on the inside than it appeared from the outside. It looked like it should only contain a single room, yet in reality, it had a full kitchen, living room, bathroom, and 4 full bedrooms. "At least we don't have to tough it out under the stars," Aaron said. The whole thing seemed wrong, but he was right. I'd loved the idea of reigniting memories at our favorite camping spot, but I hadn't been too excited about sleeping outside exposed to God knows what. I definitely preferred the cozy cabin option. I chose the last bedroom at the end of the hall, furthest from the main room, thinking it would offer the most peace. When I opened the door, though, I froze on the threshold. The wallpaper was peeling in familiar patterns. The creaky twin bed was covered in a comforter I hadn't seen since I was 9 years old. Navy blue with tiny astronauts and planets spiraling outward like galaxies. A tiny lamp shaped like a rocket ship glowed softly in the corner, and a stack of mystery books I'd long since donated sat neatly on the nightstand. Everything was exactly how my childhood bedroom had looked, even down to the weird little scratch in the wall by the baseboard that I'd made with a toy sword. I stepped inside, half expecting to hear my mom call me in for dinner. The room smelled like childhood, like fruit snacks, sun-warmed carpet, and sleep. I sat down on the bed, and the mattress even creaked the same way. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. I wasn't scared yet, not really, but definitely unnerved. I stepped back out into the hallway and called for the others. When they poked their heads out of their doorways, They all had the same look on their faces. Half confused, half delighted, I think. Each of them had pretty much the same thing happen to them. No astronauts or rocket ships, of course. But each of their rooms was expertly crafted to look like a bedroom where they had the fondest memories. Everything from a childhood bedroom to a comfy college dorm. Okay, seriously, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Does anyone else think this is too perfect? Jules shrugged, hugging one of her old plush rabbits to her chest. I don't know. Maybe someone built this place up for nostalgia, like a themed Airbnb or something? Aaron chuckled and strummed his old guitar, letting the sound echo warmly through the walls. Yeah, man. Maybe this is like our reward for surviving adulthood, you know? A little slice of the good old days. But even as he said it, his fingers moved slower across the strings, like he didn't quite believe his own joke. None of us did. The longer we stood there in that hallway, the more I noticed things I hadn't before. The wood grain of the floor moved subtly, like ripples in a still pond. The cabin breathed softly, like it was asleep. I was definitely spooked at this point, but I didn't want to scare the others. So, I told them I was going to step outside for some fresh air and began making my way towards the front door. I know I said the cabin was bigger on the inside before, but getting back to the front door seemed like walking for miles in mud. I was putting one foot in front of the other, but the door was only inching closer. When I finally touched the door handle, the cabin seemed to shudder slightly. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it, though I wasn't sure I had. I opened the door and stepped outside, the warm air at my back begging me to stay. I expected to see the fire pit, the trail, maybe our old carved initials in the crooked pine just a few yards out. But instead, I saw cabins. Dozens of them, lined up in neat little rows, each one identical to the one I'd just walked out of. Same spruce trees crowding them, same chimney smoke curling lazily into the twilight sky. The woods were gone, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just there, hidden behind the repeating geometry, like scenery in a stage play you're not supposed to touch. The dirt beneath my feet didn't feel right either. Too soft, too warm. And I swear to God, the trees, the ones framing each cabin, they leaned in just a little, and I looked at them, like they were listening, or waiting for me to speak. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The way the chimney smoke spilled from each chimney the exact same way. The way each tree looked so similar, it was like they were cloned. The way the wood of each cabin matched every other cabin, down to the grain. It was all wrong. So very wrong. Each cabin looked almost picturesque, treetops silhouetted against the colorful sky. But then, so did every other cabin. Almost like someone cut them all from the same perfectly identical mold. It was all too much, too surreal. I didn't know if it was a dream, a nightmare, or worse, if it was real. I turned around to go back inside to regroup, to make sense of something, but the cabin behind me wasn't the same. The door was closed. The light inside had shifted from golden and warm to something colder, dimmer, like an old bulb on the verge of burning out. I stepped forward and the door creaked open on its own, not inviting this time, beckoning. Inside, everything had changed. The cozy living room was too dark, the shadows too long. The furniture was still there, but it had aged, as if decades had passed in the few minutes I'd been outside. Cobwebs stretched like veins across the ceiling beams. The smell of apple pie had curdled into something sour and meaty. My friends were nowhere to be seen. Only Max, the stuffed tiger, sat on the couch, slumped over like he'd been waiting for far too long. I called out for my friends, but the only answer was my own echo. The walls creaked and groaned under the strain of mere existence. The bedrooms were gone, and the whole atmosphere was heavy with dread. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and I bolted for the door. The once warm and welcoming breeze was now a cold and forceful gust that shoved me back out into the clearing. And there they were, my friends, walking up the same winding path we'd just traveled a few hours before. That same cautious enthusiasm as I walked towards the cabin. And me, somehow. I was there with them, following the sweet scent of apple pie right through the front door. I called out, tried to warn them, tried to block the door, but they walked right through me like I wasn't even there, right into whatever that thing was. It definitely wasn't just a cabin. The door latched shut behind them, and the cabin disappeared into nothingness. I ran as fast as I could and didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed into the driver's side door of my car. I never did see those friends again. Never found out what happened to them. Never figured out a way to explain what happened to anyone else either. But when I got home that day, I'm not really sure how, but Max was tucked away in my bag, staring up at me with his cold, black eyes. I inherited the cabin from a grandmother that I barely remember. My mother used to mutter about her in passing, something about old ways and bad blood. But she never elaborated, and I never asked. When the attorney handed me the key, it came with a note in my grandmother's tight, angular handwriting. Burn the attic. Not what's in it. The attic itself. I laughed at the time, figured it was dementia or dramatics. But as soon as I stepped foot into that suffocating little house tucked deep in the woods, I felt something watching me, something still and ancient, like the woods were holding their breath. The best way I can describe the cabin is vintage. It was cramped, but well kept, and it smelled old, like aging wood. It was only about a 10-minute drive from the town, but still far enough for some peace and quiet. As small and stuffy as it was definitely both quiet and peaceful. At first, I wandered the house, wondering aloud what all this bad blood business was about. Mid-sentence, a sharp creak stopped me in my tracks. It had come from upstairs, in the attic. But, as far as I knew, I was supposed to be the only one there. I somewhat cautiously climbed up the creaky old stairs towards the attic, but before I'd even fully entered, I saw something big on the wall, covered in a thick, dusty old tablecloth. The cloth was a deep maroon, almost black with age, and its edges were weighed down by tarnished brass tacks that had been driven straight into the wall. I stepped closer and realized those weren't tacks at all, but tiny, intricate metal shapes. Runes, maybe. Each one bent slightly with the force it must have taken to hammer them in. The air felt wrong here, thinner somehow. Like the attic didn't breathe the same way the rest of the house did. I reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the cloth. Some part of me screaming to stop. But curiosity is a louder voice than fear. I peeled back the edge just enough to glimpse a corner of the object underneath. Polished, black glass in an ornate, gilded frame that seemed to shimmer slightly, even in the dust-choked light. Thinking I may have found something truly valuable in the old house, I dashed downstairs to find a hammer, a screwdriver, anything to pull out those tacks and see what was underneath. I still wish I hadn't, but hindsight is 20/20, right? Anyway, what I actually found was a rusted old crowbar with the initials JM engraved in the side. I didn't remember anyone with those initials living there, but I wasn't really concerned with thinking about it. I ran back to the attic, half out of breath, and began trying to pry out the tacks. They didn't come easy. Each one shrieked against the wood as I worked them loose, like metal screaming through bone. I only realized I'd started crying when a hot tear slipped into the corner of my mouth, metallic and bitter. Finally, the last room popped free with a soft clink, and the cloth fell in a slow, deliberate heap at my feet. The mirror behind it was massive, nearly 7 feet tall and carved with a level of detail that didn't belong in a place like this. The frame twisted with leaves and eyes, so many eyes, that seemed to glint even in shadow, following my every movement. And there I was, just me, staring back at myself. The mirror did make me look good though, like I was glowing. I shifted back and forth between admiring the craftsmanship and the strange design, and admiring how vibrant it made me look. Something was wrong though. The me in the mirror was smiling gently, but I couldn't feel myself smiling. I chalked it up to exhaustion. After all, it had been a long day, and I was tired. I heaved the heavy cloth back onto the mirror, coating myself with a plume of dust in the process, and headed back downstairs to settle in for the night. That night, the house groaned around me like it was stretching, wood expanding and sighing as it cooled. But there was something rhythmic buried in the noise. I told myself it was just the wind through the eaves, but when I woke up sometime after midnight, the air was deathly still. I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The hallway light I'd left on was off, and there was a faint amber glow pulsing from upstairs, flickering like candlelight. I crept to the staircase, the floorboards betraying every step, and looked up. My stomach nodded instantly. The attic door was open, and the cloth I'd replaced so carefully was gone. In the mirror, I saw myself, but it wasn't me. It couldn't be. I was covered in something dark, like syrup or something else. It looked like there were small shapes lying motionless on the floor around me, and there was something shiny in my hand, stained with a dark liquid. The attic wasn't lit well enough to tell what any of it was. I stepped back and frantically looked around the room, but nothing the mirror showed was there. I turned back to the mirror, heart pounding, and watched in frozen disbelief as my reflection slowly tilted its head and smiled wider. A deep, knowing smile that didn't belong on my face. Then it lifted a finger, my finger, and pressed it to its lips. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the attic stairs, clawing the wall for balance as bile rose in my throat. When I finally worked up the nerve to look again, the mirror showed only me, pale and wide-eyed, staring at my own terror-stricken face. I dried the cloth back up, nailing the runes in place as best I could with trembling hands, and fled downstairs. I didn't sleep that night. Every rustling leaf, every creak that echoed through the cabin, and every soft footstep that shouldn't have been real kept me awake. When the sun's first light climbed through the curtains and cooled on the bedroom floor, I leapt out of bed and rushed to the kitchen. On the counter was a haphazardly placed kitchen knife, painted with something dark red, almost black, that had long since dried. Next to it was a stuffed rabbit, a children's toy, sliced open and coated in the same thing that was on the knife. I screamed, not loud, more like a broken gasp, the kind that barely escapes your throat because your body's too afraid to make a noise. I hadn't seen that toy before. I didn't own it, no one had visited, and yet, it sat there, like it had always belonged to me. I backed away slowly, my knees weak, every breath a struggle to not hyperventilate. When I finally mustered the nerve to touch the knife, just the handle, it was ice cold, like it had been lying in snow, not sitting on my kitchen counter. That was the moment I knew something was wrong with me, or with the mirror, because I hadn't left that knife out, and I hadn't gone back upstairs after covering the mirror. Had I? Maybe. Maybe not. Regardless, I had already had enough. I was going to end this. Whatever this was. I grabbed the crowbar, marched back into the attic with purpose, and ripped out every rune. When the cloth fell, the thing staring back at me was not of this world. It was wild-eyed, hunched over slightly, and its skin was so pale as if it had been dead for ages. I recoiled in disgust, but I found the courage to grip the crowbar like it might leave me here alone with this thing, and I swung it at the mirror. The glass didn't shatter. It caved inward, like striking the surface of a frozen pond. It rippled, groaned, but refused to break. My reflection didn't mimic the swing. It watched me with gleaming, sunken eyes, head tilted in curiosity. Then it smiled. I screamed and struck it again, once, twice, over and over until something finally gave. The mirror exploded inward with a howl that didn't come from me, a deafening shriek, and the attic filled with a wind that shouldn't have existed. But behind the glass, there was no wall. Just a corridor, black, shifting, impossibly deep, and out of it stepped me. Not the me I know, but the one that smiled when I didn't. A cold mist seeped out of the hole that used to be the mirror. It pulsed across the floor in shallow waves, breaking around the form of the horror that just stepped through. I realized then what she meant when she said to burn the attic. I realized she wasn't joking, and I wasn't laughing. But I wasn't gonna just burn the attic. I decided then and there that the whole house would be a pile of ashes as fast as I could manage. I ran hard, pushing myself to get out. Get out now, get away from that thing. Outside, I grabbed a gas can and a pack of matches out of my truck. When the house went up in flames, I swear, I heard it screaming. I swear I saw it writhe and shake. I still see it sometimes when I look in the mirror. Or maybe it's just me. Thank you for joining me on today's journey. If you enjoyed these stories, please click the like button, tap the subscribe button, and ring that bell. It helps us reach more people like you. And if you'd like more, our Patreon supporters get early access and exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Links in the description. There are always more dark stories to tell. I'll see you next time. Take care.